Welcome to the Leadership by Design podcast, where thoughtful leaders share lessons from their journey. I'm David Adams, founder of the Business Freeder Group, and today I have Stuart Canning, who leads business development for C1 Risk. So welcome, Stuart. I'd love to start off with you telling our audience a little bit about yourself, your company, and your journey.
Sure. I'm originally from the UK, but I've been in San Francisco. Yeah, we're based in the Bay Area, as is my company. I've been here for about, longer than I can remember, about 25 years now. I originally came over to the States for graduate school, and I have a pretty non-traditional path into both business and leadership in that I have a master's degree from the University of Kansas in French literature. So that's a good one to unwrap. But effectively, I was pretty lucky with my career. I split my career between nonprofit and for-profit. I spent about 20 years leading fundraising teams for private universities, international organizations, and NGOs before moving into the private sector, I suppose. And I co-founded C1 Risk back in the company was started in 2015 by my co-founder Lily, and then I joined the organization to take the product to market in 2017. So C1 Risk itself is an AI integrated all-in-one solution for governance, risk, and compliance. We have to get the AI up front these days, right? So what that means, loosely speaking, is we're a software solution that helps organizations manage all of their risk and compliance data effectively. So we loosely affiliate to the cybersecurity world in that if you imagine cybersecurity tools that are built to protect organizations, firewalls, vulnerability scanners, all types of things like this, we take the data that they produce and we bring that into our platform and we effectively make it actionable from a governance standpoint. So we help executive leadership evaluate their risk posture. We help them ensure that they stay in compliance with any kind of regulations or best practice standards that they need to meet. And then generally speaking, we help them hopefully improve their governance practices by evaluating that data.
And is that mostly around IT risk or also other types?
No, that's a really good question. So obviously it's heavily you might think would be heavily centered in IT risk, and that is a lot of what we do. But actually, no. I think one of the powerful things about our platform in particular is that we use for enterprise risk, we use for operational risk.
Okay.
So we do step outside of IT quite frequently, in fact. And actually, it's one of the things that we talk about a lot around the GRC industry. It tends to be nested in IT, and we actually think that that GRC really belongs IT adjacent because IT is a customer in many respects of the GRC platform and is being vetted by the GRC platform. And so there's that can lead to conflicts of interest potentially, right?
Well, and risk brings up all sorts of different things for different people. For me, somebody says risk, and I just think, how many hours have I spent in a booth trying to get into a refinery, where I had to watch the safety videos first before they'd let me in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, but they even translate that, right? And I think that's a go-to for a lot of people, or from that IT perspective, risk is this product going to break, or are we protected? Are we protected by this solution? Right. But if you take that a layer back or up, even realistically, what all risk is about for organizations is how much money is this going to cost us? Right. And what's our exposure? And is our reputation going to be damaged? Which is, again, why even with IT risk, there are other factors that have to be brought into account and evaluated when you look at any kind of risk. So that's something that we really like to talk about a lot and really expose about the GRC industry. It's governance is really the important part of that GRC acronym, and it's probably the one that we talk about the least in many respects.
Right, right. And, thanks for sharing that. It sounds like you've had a really interesting journey. What trends would you say you're currently seeing in the governance and risk space? And, how are those impacting either yourselves or the customers you serve?
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody, going back to sort of the IT part of it, of course, AI is on everybody's lips right now, and which is both an opportunity and a challenge, I think, for most organizations, in that it's obviously, I don't think we even know the capabilities that AI is going to bring us yet, but we're beginning to discover those. But I also think it's a much misunderstood term.
Hmm.
And in many respects, has been around for a lot longer than we've been talking about it. In that it's really machine learning, right? So
Yeah.
we've had machine learning for a long, long time. This is a development thereof, right? So I think from that perspective, what that's done to all industries is it's causing a little bit of a reboot, somewhat the way the communication phase of the of the boom did in the early 2000s, right? But from a GRC perspective, I think what it has forced is many organizations have probably, I don't want to say they haven't valued looking at risk or evaluating risk enough, but they've maybe done, what's necessary as opposed to what's important. So a little bit
Okay.
they've skirted the line of what we have to do versus what we really should be doing. And I think that now we're a lot of organizations are really being forced to think about their risk exposure because it's so endemic in everything that we use, and because we're all such technology forward organizations now, there are so many different types of risks that are embedded, and these risks change on a daily basis. Governance, risk, and compliance used to be three very separate silos in organizations that didn't really talk to each other, and now that realistically, you can't have one without the other. AI is enabling us to do what we call continuous monitoring, to really actually continually evaluate the environment that we're working in and continually look at our risk posture. But then the other side of it is, of course, AI is also ahead of the curve all the time. So every time we come up with a treatment for a risk, or we mitigate, AI might have already thought of three other ways to attack us. So
And switching from a compliance mentality, doing only what is required, to more of a strategic mentality, how do you how do you help leaders who are under pressure, right? To
yeah,
for
yeah,
this result, this week, this month, this quarter,
absolutely.
take that more strategic view.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the reality is with leadership, I think we all know the term drinking from the fire hose, right? There's a perpetual feeling of that, and I think that what you've got to do, whatever the data, whatever's being thrown at you, you've got to. At the end of the day, you've got to prioritize. So you've got to know what's the most important thing that you need to be doing,
Mhm.
and that often relates to understanding where where the issue is impacting could impact the organization. So it's being able to thread all of that data together. A great example is, when you're a really technology forward company, you're going to see thousands of vulnerabilities popping up on your scanners at all times. There's absolutely no way that you can manage or maintain or fix every one of those vulnerabilities that comes at you. So again, where GRC becomes really important is you've got to be able to take that data, and there's a little bit of garbage in, garbage out, right? And really be able to synthesize that data to what's actually going to be the most effective for the organization. So whether that's protecting it, or whether, again, you can look at it from the other perspective as well. What are the thresholds of risks that you can actually take effectively to advance the organization too? So from a leadership perspective, you've got to have that data at your fingertips, and then also be able to shut out the noise of everything else around you, which is very complicated, albeit. But I think I actually saw, I don't remember his name, but I believe it was the CISO of Apple,
Mhm.
recently published an article on LinkedIn actually talking about that very thing, about how way.
What advice would you give a leader to sort of get them out of that doing only what's needed mindset into, reaching a little bit more forward?
I think, I mean, part of it's in the people that you have around you, right? You got to hire well, and I think and the other thing I think that really is critical is getting that data into a digestible format so you can take it to the executive, this, you know, executive leadership, so to speak, and whether you're a mid-level director
Mhm.
and you're going up to the C-suite, or whether you're in the C-suite and you're going up to your board committee, and frankly defending your work and getting the budget that you need to deliver. Which I think, you know, to be honest, especially if you're not on the business side of an organization, so particularly if you are on the IT side, I actually think that's something that people struggle with, because that communication, that sort of selling gene, because
Mhm.
you're almost selling your own job, right? Selling your
Sure.
own responsibilities is not always there. It's important, like the way you talk to your team, the way you assign tasks to your team, really need clarity, because if something's confused, it's just going to take more time that you already don't have, right? So, and that's going to help you in the end.
Do you see any moves for people actually trying to quantify risk? I mean, I spent a good portion of my career in the energy industry.
Yeah,
Several maintenance reliability analyses that actually will put a probability on
yeah,
an event, even if it's a, once in 100 year event, and a cost
yeah.
to it, and they multiply it all out.
Yeah, I think that's important, because and I think there are, we're seeing more and more tools that do that. And certainly that's one thing that we do in the C1 Risk platform as well. I mean, another thing that our customers like about it is that you can both qualify and quantify risk in different ways. So that could be that you can look at it from a financial perspective, from an
Right.
operational perspective. How much would it cost us? What would our reputation be? All of those things can be measured, and yeah, from a financial perspective in particular, you ultimately, if you can quantify that relatively accurately, quantifying it from a financial perspective isn't the only element. You know, you do need to understand the exposure to the infrastructure of the organization as well, right? And make decisions based upon that. It can't always be about money, even though obviously that's always going to be an underlying theme. The team leaders will sit around a table with a list of risks and be like, I think this is a high risk. I think this is a medium risk. I think it's that, right. So that in itself is a risk. What's important for your organization, and quantify risk that way.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a balance between being process oriented and tribal knowledge. You talked
Yeah,
about
yeah,
hiring the right people. I think we mentioned that mostly in an attitude perspective, but there's also knowledge, right?
for sure.
So I'm sure in risk, do you see in the various people that you see, how do they balance the tribal knowledge and the process side of managing risk?
Yes, I think that that's almost a day-to-day question, to be honest with you, because I think the tribal knowledge and that historical knowledge can be very, very valuable. But
Hmm.
we're also in an era where technology is moving so fast.
Hmm.
So our environment is shifting maybe not on a daily basis, but our environment is shifting very, very quickly. So the tribal knowledge should never be ignored, but you've got to find a way to stay in front of the changes as well. And I think that's really, I think that's probably, if I had to say, the biggest challenge facing leadership today, and I think, cultural dynamics within teams themselves, which I think are widening also due to technology. But
Speak a
yeah.
little bit more about that, widening between what
Yeah,
and
well,
what.
I think that if you look at, we're in an interesting moment because, no offense, but old farts like you and me, who didn't grow up with necessarily email, or even or from my case, mobile phones that came. I didn't get my first mobile phone till I was probably mid-20s, because they weren't invented. They were the size of a brick, and they were
Right.
too heavy to carry around. So, and then fast forward to now, to a culture of where we've got so many mediums of communication, and so the generational gap of how we actually communicate I think that that's actually causing great challenges within
Hmm.
the workplace. If I'm on a deadline and I need something, yeah, my go-to would always have been to not to email somebody. It would have been to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I know you're busy, beg forgiveness, but I gotta get this report. Can you get it? Can you help me? Right. So
Right.
whereas today, there's a generation that doesn't answer the phone, that doesn't and will only respond to written communication. Typically, even email is becoming defunct, right? So yeah,
Platform proliferation.
platform proliferation, indeed, right? So, and I think what that does is it takes away so many elements to collaboration because we're completely dependent on that person choosing to respond
Mhm.
or even seeing it, like, no malice intended, right? But and or how they prioritize, right? So you kind of lose the art of negotiation in a way, right? So COVID created has created a remote culture.
Right.
So even though some organizations have brought people back to the office, I think by and large, we're mostly at least part-time remote, right? As in across the workforce. And so again, so no water cooler conversations, no sort of interaction between workers, So I can even speak from myself, from a customer perspective. I've met less than 10% of my customers face to face, and not through lack of trying, to be honest with you, but because people they don't go into the office anymore, or they are.
So springboarding off of that, how do you keep growing yourself as a leader, especially given these communication challenges and
Yeah. And again, I go back to my little buzzword, which is clarity. I think from a process standpoint, you have to have clarity around your process. So if we communicate to you, are there flags I can put in something to make sure that that I need a response? Does that mean that then as a team we have to have a weekly meeting, or maybe two meetings a week, one at the beginning, one at the end, where we really go through almost like a scrum like culture,
Mhm.
right? Where you're like, what are you doing? What's blocking you? What's on your agenda? What did you do last week? What's blocking you? What are you doing this week? And what's blocking you from doing that? I think that those are the kind of things that can be very, very effective. So you have to start to think about, look at the makeup of your team, the structure of your team, and figure out how you can make sure that you get all of your you're still able to communicate effectively. um the other side of it is, to be honest, I think this is where in a way we actually almost have to get closer to each other. We have to kind of understand that Jack likes Slack and John likes text. And, I know that sounds sort of trite in a way. And obviously, if you're managing a very large team, you have to, again, adapt based upon that. If you're a relatively small team where you might only have a couple of direct reports, or maybe you're the direct report to it for everybody, that's doable. If you get into a larger environment where you really have direct report, where you have a group of people, you're managing different segments, or each of them is managing different parts of the team, then you've got to have really strong lieutenants in place, and you've got to have your clarity among your lieutenants and make sure that they pass that down the chain, right? And I think that, yeah, I mean, that I talk about delegation. We were talking about how the leaders manage the fire hose. Delegation, smart delegation. I call it purposeful delegation. I
Okay.
think it's really, really important. And what I mean by that is, if you have a meeting with your team and you say, I need a solution for how to solve the world in 5 days. Come back to me in 3 days, right? If you're lucky, they might come back to you with an idea. But if you actually say, I think you've got to go deeper than that. You've got to explain your criteria when you assign a task. Make sure you explain your criteria. Make sure you're very clear about what the outcome that you're looking for. And that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you're sort of giving them everything, but put parameters around it so that they understand context, right? Yeah. So before we actually started recording, you said we were talking about sort of we're leaders, but we've also worked for leaders, obviously, still do.
Right.
I think one thing that always got under my skin was when I presented an idea to a leader, and their first comment back to me would be, well, I was thinking more along something like this. Because my response to that is, well, why didn't you tell me that when you
Right.
gave me the task, right? It's too late, and you've just wasted however many hours of my time by not actually making that clear up front. And I think again, because we have so little contact necessarily with people, if we don't communicate effectively, A, maybe you lose your team, and B, you're certainly not gonna get as much accomplished as you need to.
Share with us a formative story on your leadership journey. Could be something that didn't work out and what you learned from it, or maybe someone that was a great leadership role model for you.
I'll say that I took a role. I'm not gonna say the name of the organization, but I took a role with a pretty large organization, and
Hmm.
this was when I was in nonprofit. But it's all translatable. I was running the fundraising program. When I came into the program, I was running the entire fundraising program, reporting to the chairman of the board and the president of the CEO of the organization. It was a team of about 60 people, and they were not siloed in any way whatsoever, segmented in any way whatsoever. So they all had job responsibilities, but they all basically reported to me. Initially, I mean, I think I pressed the panic button a little bit when I first joined into how can I possibly, this is crazy, how can I do this? But I so I initially moved to structure the team and bring in some and elevate some folks within the team. But what I realized, so this goes to culture, right? So what I realized is I thought what I was doing was good because I was effectively creating a path for promotion
Hmm.
for everybody in the team and elevating some people. So roll forward 6 months and I basically find out through we did 360 evaluations that this is something that was really weighing on that they really were upset by this and felt like I had almost created this, I'll go to my English roots, monarchical structure, right? So
Right,
i'm
right.
i'm the king and all my subjects are around me, which was not my intention at all. It was really just to actually give them better service
Hmm.
and obviously prioritize my own time, right? So I actually sat down with the team and I went to them and through I won't go into too many details, but through process of elimination, what we actually came to was we kept the lieutenants in place. So I wanted to keep the structure. And I did manage to sell them that would be advantageous for them because at some point that they were going to have the opportunity to get into those roles. But then what we agreed to was these group meetings. So where I would attend group meetings and make sure that every person in the team had some kind of access to me as during that group meeting. And then what we even started to do, we kind of layered below that. So as teams had overlapping responsibilities, we would sometimes less frequently bring those teams together. But one of the things that have been really tough for me during that initial phase was that even though I had structured the
Hmm.
teams, people would still just come to my office and ask me, no matter what, because they felt that they had that.
Right. That was the culture.
Yeah, that was their previous. That was the culture. While I would love to have been somebody who welcomed that. It just meant that I was working till 10, 11 o'clock at night to do my own work, right? So, and I'm like, I got to have a life too. So once we implemented that, I almost regretted it because people stopped coming to see me individually.
Right, right, right.
But it really did work.
Interesting.
So it was so there again, not to harp on it, but that I hadn't really, even though I had clarity in my own idea, in that
Hmm.
case, I hadn't actually done enough, communicated well with the team, and I hadn't actually really got the feedback from them. And they came up with this structure of the meetings. So allowing them to actually come up with a solution really did work in that case.
Well, that sounds like a great example of some of the big C's: culture, context, and communication, right?
Absolutely, yeah, it really, really was. Yeah,
So
yeah,
thanks
yeah.
for sharing that. I think we'll wrap up there, but Stuart, thank you. It was a real pleasure.
Hope
And
this was helpful.
to our listeners, thanks again for tuning in to Leadership by Design to keep your leadership thinking fresh with lessons from thoughtful leaders like Stuart. So we'll see you next time.
Hmm.
Thanks.
Thanks.